One time, there was a devoted, dedicated missionary who wanted to share the message of God with others. So he was traveling unexplored frontiers in an attempt to help people connect to God. And in his travels, one time he reached a simple rural area where there was a whole community whose lives were centered around the coal mines. So he approached them and he asked them for a seminar, for an audience. The whole community, the rural community, the village had gathered, and he was trying to explain to them that the goal of one's life is to surrender to God. But their faces were looking pale and dull and they seemed to be not interested. He tried to tell them that one can never be very happy without God. If one adds God in one's life can be very happy. Every word can be a song, every day can be celebration. But it didn't appeal to them much. Our preacher was trying to explain from every possible way, but people didn't seem to take in. He tried telling them that without God you will always be miserable. It is this one step shelter of God, surrender to God, which can bring about such a powerful transformation in your life. Not much appeal. He was gasping for words. And then he started telling them, you see, you have to surrender to God. He was getting aroused. And people started looking at his eyes, staring at his eyes, as if they were asking, okay, what if you don't? And then he started telling, if you don't surrender to God, you will go to hell. And it was a rural community. People didn't even know what is the meaning of the word hell. So somebody asked him, what is this hell? He said, hell is a very dark place. It's very horrifying. You cannot see anything. Once you enter, you don't understand from where you entered, from where you will go out. Hell is a very horrifying place. Any impediment may happen at any time, any calamity may come. It is very torturous. It is hot, it is dark, it is torturous, it is unpredictable. Every moment there is some or the other tension, pressure, insecurity. That's hell. And people started whispering, they started nodding. And the preacher thought that, okay, maybe they are understanding. But everybody started whispering and discussing, oh, hell, And then they voiced out, then they said, okay, we are ready to go to hell. That's okay, that's alright. And he got startled. He got taken aback. He said, what are you saying? He said, oh, this hell is not the dark place, unpredictable, cold, torturous. We are used to that kind of life. Hell is just another kind of coal mine, it seems, so we don't have any problem. We don't want to surrender to God. So our preacher was completely shattered. He started praying to God for some inspiration, for some words, and then he got an inspiration. He got an idea. He got a eureka. And then he opened his eyes, he smiled and he looked into their eyes and he said, you see, there is one difference. There is one thing which is missing in hell. Very important. People said, no problem, We are used to all such things. Some little here and there variation doesn't matter. He said, no, this is very important thing. He said, in the hell, there are no newspapers. And when he said that, everybody was in shock and they started discussing, oh, there are no newspapers, how will you pass time? At least for the torch we can read newspapers, we can discuss about political affairs, and we can discuss about sports and cinema and so on. But there are no newspapers in hell. Oh hell, our life is going to be hellish then. What kind of hell it is? Hell with hell. and they all came up with a unanimous answer. They said, okay, we are ready to surrender to God. Now the point to explore is that a newspaper has nothing to give and take with God or religion. Then why did our preacher talk about a newspaper? He brought about the aspect of a newspaper. What is this religion which is whose preaching session encourages the use of encourages a newspaper or uses a newspaper's presence or absence as a means to help people take shelter of God. So in this way we can see is it a policy on the part of the preacher, or is it just a way by which of explanation according to the audience so that they can understand the message? So in this way we can understand that many times we can see various religions having apparent contradictions, so much of variegatedness that one gets confused. Which path to take, which road to take, do all paths lead to the same goal, and understanding the differences and the uniqueness as well as the essence of the various parts of religion, and how can we approach it in a step-by-step manner. So some people say that, okay, my religion is the only religion, and some people will say any religion is okay. So both seem to be extremes. An extreme stance make religion or the concept of religion appear like a cult, a fanatic, very harsh boundary and a very stringent box, and people fear to get into such a box. So, do all paths really lead to the same goal? All religious paths lead to the same goal. Any path which appears religious is leading to the same goal. It's just like saying that, okay, in a pharmaceutical outlet, any medicine can cure the disease. Medicine will cure the disease. Any medicine you take, it will cure the disease. Is it? It's not so superficial or gross like that. Is it not? Or just like saying, take any flight, take any train, and you will reach your destination. So we understand that there is specific. Travel requires planning. A disease requires planning. You need to have a proper formula. And the person has to search the medicine, the chemical formula. Not that any flight will lead to the same destination. Similarly, every religious path cannot lead to the same goal. It is specific. It is specific. And therefore, the pursuit of religion should not be done in ignorance or out of a sentiment. One should have a full, intelligent planning and knowledge about. So there are three approaches to the understanding of religion. The first approach says that the first approach is called as exclusivistic approach. It says, okay, only my religion is the only religion. All other religions, no religions. It's just like it's saying that, okay, now we are exploring the fact that not all the buildings are the same. So before we touch on that, we say, okay, this building is the only building. It's like if we say, okay, the building which I am standing, only this building is IIT. Exclusivistic. The other one is called as inclusivistic. It says, okay, all buildings are IIT. Now we may say, okay, there can be no one particular building which is IIT. Similarly, all buildings cannot be IIT. And there has to be some objective criteria, some qualifying criteria which qualifies a building to be IIT. And there can be multiple buildings which are IITs. Now if you say, okay, the objective criteria is, okay, some IIT should be written in it. But IIT is written on top of this building also. Is it IIT? But this is IIT. But we cannot say this is the only IIT. There are many other IITs as well. There are many other different colors and shades of buildings which are called as IIT. So any building can become an IIT provided it fulfills a set of qualifying criteria which is very nicely meticulously jotted down and well accepted criteria of qualification, of research, of the caliber of professors, the grants, the research labs, the student-teacher ratio. So all that goes into what is called as IIT. So in a similar way, it has to have the grant of the HRD ministry and so on and so forth. Similarly, any school, any building can become a CBSE building provided it follows a certain criteria of affiliation and a qualification which are given by CBSE. So this approach is called as pluralistic approach. That okay, multiple buildings can be IITs. Similarly, multiple buildings can be a CBSE school building. But each of those buildings should qualify a certain qualification criteria. That's called as pluralistic approach. Religion is presented according to the ability of the audience to digest the truth. It's just like, the same particular maths teacher may be a PhD, but then if he goes into primary school, he's going to teach 2 plus 3. So in elementary school, a child may not be able to answer the question of what is 2 minus 5. He'll say wrong question. The teacher doesn't know. He cannot frame the proper question. Whereas a 6th, 7th boy can answer 2 minus 5. Double differential calculus equations, double differential order equations, so on. Partial differential equations and so on. So the instruction is given according to the level of the person. Now there is nothing high or low in this. Somebody who is studying in class 1, it is not that he is inferior, and somebody is class 12, he is superior, because the class 12 was class 1 someday. So this is the point. So now if you see a basic instruction like thou shall not kill, or we can understand, okay, that what kind of audience such message has to be given. So by the message, now it's not just against one particular religion. Even in Vedas we see multitude of instructions. Multiple levels of instructions within the Vedas as well. So it's not about even one within a religion also there are various divisions, because in this way we can understand every religion or every scripture is like a mother. She caters to everyone. Just like a mother may have a child who is very intelligent, may have a child who is little not very so intelligent, little dumb, is a duffer. So she will relate with both of them differently, but she won't neglect anyone. Similarly, the Lord doesn't neglect anyone. Whether one is having more faith, more advanced, more less advanced, more moralistic, less moralistic, no moralistic, the Lord will try to help everyone. That's how there are various levels of religion. So now we understand another aspect, that the differences amongst various religions exist. Firstly, according to the level of the audience. But we will see that these differences only exist in the externals, in the mannerisms, in the behaviors, in the rituals, in the details. The core essential principles remain the same. Every religion teaches love of God. Religion means obeying the laws of God. One should shun material pleasures, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master. The material world is temporary. Every religion talks about it. So there are these two, there are two aspects of a religion. Exoteric aspect, which talks about the externals, the behavior patterns, the mannerisms, the details, the rituals, and the esoteric aspect, which talks about the very essence, the common essence principles. Now the esoteric aspect remains the same. In fact, this esoteric aspect is the objective qualification criterion in a pluralistic approach. So different religions you see give the same message. Like meat eating, Islam says one should not eat dog and pig, and if one has to eat meat, 7 parts of meat should be donated. Similarly, Roman Catholics say that meat should be eaten on other days, not Friday. Previously, the instruction was only on Friday, but then amendments were made. Sanatana Dharma says that this meat eating is a pillar of sinful life. True spiritual life cannot start unless you show mercy. So in fact, all religions are trying to ignite the mercy or compassion aspect and to cut down on the meat eating aspect. And they are cutting it down to various levels depending on the audience. And this is done so that the audience does not reject religion completely. Like say for example, a child who is adamantly not studying, the mother may bargain with him that okay, if you study, I'll give you chocolates, or I'll take you to movie in the weekend. Now movie has nothing, or chocolate has nothing to even take with religion, but it is just given so that the person can step by step rise. What we see here is that various religions came at different points of time. Sanatana Dharma has been standing from the dawn of creation, Bhagavad Gita was spoken 5000 years ago, and so on. So this goes to show that at any given point of time, some of the other religion is always existing. That is happening from the dawn of creation. And at different points of time, different religions came up because the culture of people was completely different, and the culture and the area of that, in the particular area that religion actually germinated, it was a different culture, and therefore the same message was given in a different format, at a different scale. Now we say the depth of verifiable and inconceivable information in the Vedas is far greater than other scriptures. Yes, so in now in various scriptures, like say in Bible, it is said that okay, God said that there was light and there was light, and God said let there be earth and there was earth. So yes, the point, the phenomena is mentioned, but the principle, how that happened, is not mentioned. So that's why Jesus said that there are many things which I want to reveal, but what can I do? There's so much to say, but you are not qualified. So there's nothing. Now, if the details are not given, that doesn't mean that the priest doesn't know, or the devotee or the acharya does not know. Jesus is like a PhD postdoctorate. Now, if a postdoctorate is put in class 1, he will also teach, take 2 apples and 3, bananas, how much it is total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he will teach that. Now he will say, okay, you know only this much after doing PhD in mathematics. But you put him in front of researchers, then he will speak about manifolds and tensor calculus and so on. So it all depends on the audience. But objectively speaking, the depth of verifiable information in Vedas is much more. So the Vedas give step-by-step information of how the creation took place. It says that actually the materialistic ego took 3 forms, being tainted by goodness, passion, ignorance, 3 types of entanglements, and then from the ego came ether, and the disturbance in ether actually produces sound, and the ether transformed into air, and air, the sky transforms into air sustains the life. From air comes the fire element, from fire comes water, and then comes the earth. So great details are mentioned in this way. Just an example. So now in this way we can understand that the Vedas is like a one-stop university. So you can have nursery also, you can have postdoctorate also in the same school. Is it not? But now there are other religions or other paths which may not be like till university level. Some may be primary school, secondary school, higher secondary school, so on. Engineering college, and a university like that. So now no school is a high school, low school, like that. That's the first principle to understand here. Because so 2 things you can understand. First of all, no school is a high school, low school, just like a primary school. Now if somebody is studying in a primary school, that doesn't mean he is lowly. Why? Because the primary school will be only till class 4th, but that school will ensure you will have tie-ups with the schools which can give further education. And the primary school will give coaching or schooling or for practice, so that the children can crack interviews of other schools which can take them to higher education level. Just like even in an engineering college, every engineering college has a placement cell which ensures that you get placement after passing out. You go to the next level of the next stage of life very nicely. So similarly, every school will take care that one progresses beyond, ahead and ahead. That's first point we can understand. The second point we can understand is that Vedas are not sentimental or political. The message of the Vedas is like an encyclopedia dictionary. Is it not? So Vedas is not just meant for a particular political tract of land. It is meant for entire humanity. Same is true. So all religions, in that sense, we can say all genuine religions, they are all talking about the same path, the same Lord. In fact, different religions are taking to different destinations on the same road. There is the same road, love of Godhead. And some religion is like a cycle rickshaw. It takes to a certain distance. Another one is like an auto, takes a little further. Another one is a bus, takes a little further. Another one is a local train, takes a little further. Another one is an express train, takes you. Another one is a plane, it can go very far. Is it not? Now the thing is that which one to take? No, for me, which one to take? So now we understand that okay, even if we are in a higher cadre or we are following a higher level of religion, that means no, that doesn't mean we can deride anyone who is following low level of religion. Education is the same. We are also gone through that stage someday or the other. That's the point. But now when it comes to, so there is broad-mindedness when we look at other religions. There has to be that element of respect. But when it comes to oneself, the question comes which one to follow. So what one can follow, if you can follow the highest, that is the best. Is it not? Why to waste time? The love of God is so intoxicating. So the same Vedas which speak about so much details about creation, the same Vedas are also speaking about subject matters which are much understandable than to us on the material level, like mathematics, advanced mathematics, cosmology. Now the Vedas are talking about okay, that the prime goal of Vedas is to develop and awaken one's love of God, but then they give here they give levels of how to approach God, various levels in which different people can approach God. The first level is the level of fear. The fear says, okay, if you don't follow the instructions, you will be sin will overpower you. You will have to suffer life after life in hellish planets. There will be eternal damnation, the day of judgment, and so on. That's a level of fear. The problem with the level of fear is what? That okay, there is a very strict teacher who thrashes children. The children will not will behave themselves in front of the teacher. As soon as the teacher goes away, children will make fun of the teacher. They won't take it to heart what the teacher wanted to teach them. The principles and the character and the discipline what he wanted to teach. That's fear. The next platform is the platform of desire. Asking the Lord, or considering God to be as an order supplier. That everybody has a big list. Oh God, you're so great. I have a small list. Please fulfill my list. I will offer Nariyal to you. Now, there is a problem in this. The problem is what? That suppose now if a child is, his teeth are spoiled and 2 teeth are eaten up by insects, worms, spoiled, and he is asking chocolate. If a mother is there, she'll not give chocolate. She'll give a slap. It's okay. You want more? So that's desire. Therefore, the third level is the level of duty. Now, duty. So duty means person is grateful. God has given me so much. At least I should say thank you. So one offers a fixed number of hours, does some anushthan, goes to some holy place once in a year. That's duty. The problem with duty is what? Duty is sarkari. One will say, okay, I have office hours 11 to 5. But you see, no mother deals with her children on the level of duty. If the child passes school at midnight, mother will not say, okay, this is outside my working hours. Now you approach your father. My working hours are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So therefore, the highest level to approach Lord is on the level of love. On the level of love, one doesn't think of expectations. One just thinks of service. He doesn't want anything. A person on the platform of love doesn't want anything for oneself. One just wants to serve and please God. Just like the pastime between Lord Narasimhadev and Prahlad Maharaj. So Lord Narasimhadev appeared to protect Prahlad Maharaj, to reciprocate in love with Prahlad Maharaj. And Hiranyakashipu was torturing Prahlad Maharaj, and the Lord appeared and the Lord killed Hiranyakashipu. And Prahlad Maharaj very humbly approached Lord Narasimhadev. Lord Narasimhadev was so angry at that point of time that all the demigods, Mother Lakshmi, everybody, nobody could please him. And then Narad Muni had put Prahlad Maharaj forward. Seeing the small boy Prahlad, innocent boy Prahlad, folding his hands, offering obeisance, Lord Narasimhadev became so pleased. He forgot his anger. Lord Narasimhadev said, oh Prahlad, I am so pleased with you. Please ask some benediction. I am ready to offer you anything. And Prahlad said, oh Lord, I am not a businessman. I am just happy serving you. And Narasimhadev said, oh, this is the attitude which pleases me the most. Therefore, you have to ask something. You please ask something. I am ready to give you everything. And Prahlad was trying. Prahlad said, no, I don't want anything. The Lord said, yes, this is the attitude which pleases me the most. Therefore, you have to ask something. And then finally, Prahlad asked some very beautiful benedictions. Prahlad said, okay, please forgive my father. Second benediction he asks, please always give me the association of your devotees. And the third benediction he asks is that, please remove all the material desires in my heart. So this is, you see, they were both bargaining with each other. But this is love. This is the platform of love. Bhagavad Gita explains that there are 3 kinds of personality traits. It is like 3 different types of ropes which pull people in 3 different types of patterns. The rope of goodness, the rope of passion and ignorance. They are called as modes or gunas. So people in ignorance are lazy, are procrastinating, are violent, are critical, are envious. That's ignorance, intoxication, so on. Daydreaming. The people in the mode of passion are very aggressive, exploitative, lusty, greedy, angry, so on. And people in the mode of goodness are calm, composed, tolerant, selfless, sacrificing, uh, equipoise. That's mode of goodness. So now the Puranas prescribe worship for people in different modes differently. In fact, there are 6 Puranas for mode of people in mode of goodness, 6 for people in mode of passion, 6 for people in mode of ignorance. People in mode of ignorance, they are asked, they are allowed, to perform very severe, austere tapasya like cutting of one's body parts and so on. Smoke, intoxications allowed to them, animal sacrifice. That's worship in the mode of ignorance. The people who follow it will get purified of mode of ignorance. People in the mode of passion, just like Hiranyakashipu wanted to be immortal, so he was worshipping the Lord, very competitive mentality, desired to become the ultimate enjoyer. That's the mode of passion. But in the mode of goodness, one doesn't desire any material benefits. One just desires to love and serve. One just desires to purify his heart. So by guidance, a pure devotee, one can go beyond the 3 modes and return back home back to God. Just like you see the love of Sudama. Sudama was being forced by his wife to go to Krishna and ask for money. And Sudama considered it as an excuse to take darshan of Krishna. He didn't ask any material benediction. He didn't ask for a single penny from Krishna. And when he was coming back, he was so happy that he didn't ask. Krishna didn't come to know. Otherwise, he would have become intoxicated and he would not have, he would have lost his dedication to Krishna. Obviously, Krishna converted his home into palace. But this is mode of goodness where one doesn't expect anything like that. One just wants to love and serve the Lord. Yes. So Bhagavad Gita tells us that how in practical way we can develop this love for Lord, we can awaken this love for Lord. The activities which can re-spiritualize us, they are called as sadhana. Like japa, chanting the holy names of the Lord, reading of the scriptures, hearing from advanced devotees. So we can understand this by the simple 4 do's which we have to do regularly, which is we can understand by ABCD. A stands for association of devotees. Association protects us, association nourishes us. Reading books. So reading the holy scriptures and holy books is like reinstalling the operating system in our virus affected heads. C stands for chanting. Chanting of the holy names cleanses our heart, cleanses our mind, dissolves our mind. So that and therefore the chanting. So chanting is like a washing machine. It's like a washing machine removes all the dirt round and round. Similarly, when we chant, the dirt in our hearts get removed. And the 4th is diet, Krishna Prasad. Whatever we eat, we should offer to Krishna. The Lord says you can offer flower, leaf, fruit, or water. With love, I will accept it. So devotee, whatever he purchases or he cooks, he offers it to Krishna, and that way the food becomes sanctified, it becomes prasad. Similarly, any ingredient we get, we first offer it to Krishna, and that way it becomes prasad. These are 4 simple ways by which we can connect to God. We can connect to God. So in this way, the Vedas, the Shastras are describing us a very practical process. In fact, there are 9 ways of serving God or connecting to God. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atma Vinevedanam. So it says hearing the holy glories of the Lord, chanting the glories of the Lord, remembering the Lord, serving, just like Mother Lakshmi is doing, Archanam, doing Archanam, Vandanam, offering prayers, Dasyam, following the instructions, Sakhyam, becoming a messenger of God, and we do this, then slowly we'll be able to offer everything, Atma Nivedanam. Just like one time Hanumanji, he saw Mother Sita was wearing kumkum on her hairline. And he asked, Mother, you wear this every day, what is this? Mother Sita said, this is very pleasing to Lord Ram. And this is an expression of one's dedication and commitment to Lord Ramachandra. So Hanumanji became very enthusiastic. He said, oh, it's pleasing to Lord Ram. It's an expression of one's commitment and dedication to Lord Ramachandra. He said, I will also put it. But why only hairline? All the lines. And therefore Hanumanji actually completely bathed himself in kumkum. And he became completely red. Like that. So he became completely, he smeared kumkum all over his body. And in that way Hanumanji very enthusiastically went to Ram Darbar. Lord Ramachandra was sitting in his celestial court. And everybody, they saw what happened to Hanumanji, and he's from tip to toe. He is completely smeared with kumkum, and Hanumanji was lush red. And Lord Ramachandra could understand the heart, the innocent heart of Hanumanji, who is only thinking of how to serve and please the Lord more and more and more. And in this way, the Lord, accepting and relishing Hanumanji's love, got up and he embraced Hanumanji. So that opportunity is there for us, which is given us. We follow the simple instructions which are given by Bhagavad Gita in our lives, and we can also awaken this love for God in our lives, which can overwhelm us or which can drown us into an ocean of bliss and ananda.